Hello everyone, and thank you very much for this opportunity. I titled this presentation as Mark Twain's Failures as Neglected Text. Actually, my...
Good.
Japanese people are so used to wearing masks. And actually, this project started with one vague and unanswered question, like is failing an American obligation? I believe that some of Twain's works, including the famous ones, are not successful. What is curious about Twain is that he did not destroy unfinished works or works that were completed but not published. He left them for future generations to read. Dr. Hurst explains the reason for this as follows. I think it is clear that unlike most writers, Mark Twain was not embarrassed by his literary remains, even when they were failures, and the unusual willingness to let the world see how he worked, including how he failed or simply misfired, had only one precondition: he must not be alive at the time. Unquote. Even considering such condition, it still seems that his determination and some clear reasons were necessary for actively showing his failures rather than hiding them. I do not believe that Twain left any explanation for this, but one might detect a certain sense of obligation on his part. Perhaps Twain is telling us that if we are to understand Mark Twain, what we can learn from the apparent failures that are there. We cannot judge Twain as a failure, but we cannot deny that he could have been one either. Moreover, he was surrounded by no small number of failures, and those who failed in their lives. In this presentation, we will consider once again Twain's relationship with one failure who was primarily close to Twain. I will argue that Twain may have considered failure to be genealogically imposed upon him. In chapter 53 of The Life on the Mississippi, the narrator, reminiscent of Twain himself, is visiting Hannibal for the first time in many years. He asks an old man he has met in town about some of the people he knew, himself under a false name, and inquires about their whereabouts. As the old man talks about each person, he focuses on who has been successful as well as who has been unsuccessful. The old man tells the story of a curious man who became a brilliant success, even when no one expected him to be one. When the narrator finally asks him how he is regarded, the old man replies, quote, or he succeeded well enough. Another case of downfall. If they sent him to St. Louis, he'd have succeeded sooner. Twain himself is placed in the category of successes there. On the other hand, it is also possible to read that he was considered that the qualities to be a failure were present in him. When considering Twain in such a light, it is possible to say that it is his brother Orion Clemens, 10 years older than him, who appears in the shadows. Twain referred this brother as a failure in his letters to William Dean Howells. Twain even strongly urged Orion to write an autobiography as a failure under the title of The Autobiography of a Coward, or Confession of a Life That Was a Failure. While it is admitted that was a new attempt to draft an autobiography of a failure who would not normally be allowed to leave an autobiography, it cannot be denied that this was also, to put it mildly, a mean suggestion. It is impossible to know what Orion really thought when he heard Twain's proposal, but it is known that he was enthusiastic about the idea. In a letter to Twain on February 29th and March 1st, 1880, Orion wrote, "The autobiography of a coward will be commenced within an hour, and the first chapter sent to you within a week." Orion, indeed, appeared to have lived his life as a failure. However, I believe that his way of thinking and being an older brother to him continued to have a profound influence on Twain, both positive and negative. The above autobiography has so far remained largely unknown, as it is said to have been either lost due to misplacement or deliberately discarded. However, I would be happy to share some of my thoughts on the letters of Orion left with us by reading them as autobiographical documents allowed to the failure. I would be happy to hear your comments on the matter. Actually, I had quite a hard time at first, being a foreigner, in reading the manuscripts of Orion's letters. Like Twain's letters, Orion's letters are all in cursive writing. And while native English speakers may have no difficulty reading them, his writing style was very difficult for me to read. Japanese people around my generation learned how to write and read cursive writing in English in the first grade of junior high school. Having little interested in learning English myself, I did not understand why such training was necessary. If it were possible, I would tell myself back then, you are learning it so that you can decipher Orion Clement's letters in your future. But I don't think that would motivate me as a boy. As I struggled through the reading, I soon discovered that Orion's spelling was amazingly accurate. There were phases where I had to decipher individual letters like I, L, or E, or R, rather than words. But that trust on him always kept me going through the long and time-consuming deciphering process. The following are among my characterization of Orion's letters to Twain. Forgive that they are about only a small selection of the letters I have chosen for this presentation. First, number one, Orion thanks for the money Twain sent him. 2, Clement's family's situation. 3, Orion's own thoughts. Orion's letters are sometimes monotonous, sometimes very suggestive, and sometimes, in my personal and subjective opinion, they are very melancholy. Most of the letters are significantly less notable than Twain's letters. However, the experience of reading the letters written by one person, starting with the oldest and continuing in order, is a rare one. And I had the sense that I was gently accompanying the life of a fine gentleman. For example, here is Orion's letter to Twain on January 21st, 1876. This is in some ways a typical letter from Orion. Dear brother, are you willing to lend me $500 a year for 2 years while I try to get into the practice of law? Your brother, Orion. P.S. I can succeed. Orion asked Twain for the money to help him return to his much sought-after law practice. Unfortunately, this plan did not work, and Orion never succeeded. This brief, sad letter makes one wonder how the words "I can succeed" in the postscript might have resonated with Twain and with Orion himself. Their corresponding letters show different characteristics of each other's formulaic writing patterns. Twain's letters to Orion always began with the friendly address, "Dear Bro," until a certain point in their lives. Twain ceased the address to Orion, however, after his letter dated September 7, 1887. After this, most letters addressed to Orion individually began with "Dear Orion." As far as I can ascertain, the only exception in the extant letters is the letter dated January 8, 1890, in which Twain used "Dear Bro." It seems closer to the truth to assume that this change reflects Twain's intent, rather than a coincidental reason or natural transition. Twain wanted to switch his relationship with his brother Orion to one as an individual, separate from their brotherly relationship. Or Twain simply wanted to separate himself from him. I interpret this change as a necessary indication The successful Twain, who had become an established author with a reputation, is even more clearly distancing himself from the unsuccessful Orion. It is an undeniable fact that Orion was dependent on such Twain. For example, their mother, Jane, died in November of 1890. At that time, Orion was dependent on the $200 per month pension that Twain sent him for living expenses, including their mother's medical bills. Orion continued to write back to Twain, thanking him for the money, along with their mother's medical condition, in a very disciplined manner. Please look at the next quotation from another of Orion letters. It was after their mother's death. I have paid all the Hannibal bills and expenses there and back, and the underlined part, how awful the death thing, how helpless the lookers on. This is my underline, your brother Orion. One of the roles of Orion letters, I would suggest, is to bring Twain's attention back to the Clemens family. What is striking in this letter is a section in which Orion probably briefly and memorably describes how he saw their mother's deathbed. That section is odd. Orion performed the most painful role that Twain did not play, describing it in never so manly terms, awful and helpless. However, no matter how negatively qualified with adjectives, Orion's behavior would have made Twain feel greatly inferior, and the mother's death may have reminded Twain of their father's death, which had occurred long before this, in which Twain also had played no role. Twain's notebook, which he used from August 1890 until July 1891, the year after his their mother's death, contains the following words. This is a quotation from Notebook 30. Only birth makes noble, so it follows indisputably that if Adam was noble, we all are. If he wasn't, none are. I take note of this reference to Adam. The name of Adam evokes the image of a father figure, and the brothers Cain and Abel. In other words, what this note means is the lineage from the father to his sons. If it is his own lineage that Twain has in mind here, it may be the recognition that he himself is connected to the lineage of failure. He might not have taken this too seriously when he was younger, for it is possible that he was not aware of his own failure lineage. As I mentioned earlier, Twain may have thought he was different he was different when he told Orion to write his autobiography as a failure. And he had one greatest strength, which is his rare ability to sublimate almost anything, including his own experiences of failures, into fine fiction. And he must have realized that, But he might have been going through a lot of changes in his mindset at this point in his life, as he was now over the age of his father's death. The process leading up to his mother's death and the accompanying report of Orion's letter may have reminded him of the issue of lineage between him and his father and his brother Orion. And that lineage is never the lineage of the successful, but of the unsuccessful. By the way, Orion's letter to Twain had different characteristics compared to Twain's letters to Orion. Orion's letter to Twain, as in the previous quotations, begins with "Dear brother" and ends with "Your brother Orion," respectively. They did not change for some time, past the time when Twain changed the way he addressed his brother in his letters to him. I imagine again how Twain might have felt that this concluding phrase, which was repeated without fail each time, must have resonated with him. I was not aware of this when I was reading his letters and typing them all into my computer. In addition, there are very few extant letters to Twain written in Orion's final years, so it is impossible to make an accurate analysis. However, after the one written to Twain February 8 and 1894, the concluding phrase, "Your brother Orion," disappears. Good for Twain if it had become automated and lose its meaning. However, the repetition of these words, although they are all the same at the textual level, may leave a different impression on the minds of the addressee. Twain attempted to distance himself from Orion by stopping calling him dear bro. I can only imagine how the three words, your brother Orion, must have sounded to Twain. As Orion, whom he thought was a failure, repeated them. In Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, Antony delivers a memorial speech for Caesar. In an environment where it is impossible to criticize Brutus for killing Caesar, Antony repeatedly used the sentence, Brutus is an honorable man. To the people, the sentence, which should be meant to praise Brutus, is repeated by Antony to agitate the people's minds as if it were a curse. Is it possible to imagine, for Twain, that these words, which always accompany a letter from Orion, could sound like that? For example, Orion's voice, which Twain could hear, might at one point have sounded like this, your brother. But as Twain became more aware of his so-called old age, as in the journal just quoted from 1891, as Twain became aware, more conscious of his birth and reflected more deeply on his connection to his father and brother, the words may have experienced a change in Twain's mind and may have sounded like your brother. What if this your brother had once meant, I am your brother and nothing else? But in time, the accent shifted forward, and the words became a strong awareness of lineage. I am your brother, not anyone else's. Twain wanted to deny it, but of course, he could not completely sever the connection. I think the letter has a characteristic that it says what needs to be written, that the disappearance of the words, your brother Orion, mean that it is no longer necessary. We know Twain also lived a life of continual failures. The difference with Orion, however, would be that he did not end up as a failure. Finally, please see this citation. In thinking over the past, is it best to say, if this event had not occurred, a train of events would have ensued, whose end would not be misplaced by some unforeseen intervening occurrence. Some people may think it is, but you will not. I know that. It is Twain's turning point of my life when they see them. However, when you read the sentence again, I don't think anyone remembers that this sentence is in that work. This is not from that. You might think it was written by someone else, based on Twain's ideas later. After all, the sentence seems very awkward to me. This is what Orion wrote in a letter to Twain, dated February 28, 1897, which he kept for about a week without posting it, and he added a few lines along with the dates he wrote them. The letter begins with my dear brother, beginning that Orion used in his letter to Twain, and this is a typical Orion letter. First, he details that a check sent to him arrived safely, to whom he gave the money and to whom he paid with it, and for what purpose. Orion died on November 11th of this year. Since this account does not seem to be connected to the previous part of this letter, it seems to be the words he wrote in his last days as he reflected in passing on his own life. I'm completely imagining from here, but I think that in his imagination, Orion saw the events of his life suffer on the table in front of him, for example, as if they were a series of events chained together. Then he thought of one particular event and wondered if his life would have been different without it. The next question is, what was this thing? I'd like to ask your opinions, that Orion had in mind at that moment. Since Orion was writing to Twain, it is likely to be something that Twain would understand. The problem with letter reading is that it can be very difficult to figure out exactly what is being referred to in letters. Again, Orion's writing on this previous day, March 5th, is diverse. And the last thing he added on the previous day was a reference to the financial problems that Twain was having. Since they are in the plural, this thing does not refer to them. I believe your financial problems will sharpen your humor. Orion here praises his brother for his ability to turn failures into success. This seems both a compliment and a disappointment that Orion himself lacked that ability. The next day, Orion added the part I just mentioned. I may just be interpreting this part as I see fit, taking advantage of the fact that the facts are so far unclear. I think that the words of March 6 are a reminder that Orion, with a letter pad in front of him that he could not easily post, recalls a train of events that have occurred in his life, especially failures among them, and laid them out in his imagination on the table in front of him, and that a big event among them. He points to what he describes as this event and assumes that had this not happened, the chain of events would have changed and his life would have been different, maybe for the better. Then the next question is, what is this event? This is difficult to deduce. But if Orion was referring to something understandable to Twain, we might be able to imagine something sinister from the context. It seems too frightening to imagine. If I weren't your brother. And your brother Orion reference is no longer present in this letter. If I were to compare the work I am doing now to writing a mystery novel, I think I would see the frustration of trying to identify the culprit in a literary case involving Twain, while still not even knowing the whole story of the case. The problem is not about the similarity between this and the Twain's turning point that was to be written 10 years later, nor a fact that Twain wrote, "Keep this on this envelope of this letter." However, if these letters are more truthful or autobiographies of those who were not allowed to write authoritative autobiographies in book form, I found it interesting to read them and to examine the facts that are there. I think it is worth taking time to read Orion's letters in more detail as his autobiography that was lost or destroyed. That was not lost or destroyed. Twain kept them knowing that it is also the obligation of the people of later generations to learn from their failures. Thank you.